Looks like it slowed down a little bit, so as people are joining, I'll just open it up for everybody. But first, thank you for joining today's presentation, the ins and outs of Shadow IT, an overview for MSPs. My name is Dakota Hipburn. I'm on the partner marketing team here at JumpCloud. Happy to be opening up today's session. So before I kick it off to Antoine and Derek and introduce them, just a couple housekeeping items. So like I said, at any time that you have any questions whatsoever during this call, feel free to put them in the questions panel. We'll try to integrate them into our conversation as they come up, but we also have dedicated time at the end to answer them and have a live Q&A going. Any questions we don't get to, whether it's time frame or if it's super individualistic, we'll definitely reach out to you afterwards and get you the answer that you're looking for there. There's also a brief survey at the end. Just quick 2 questions. Let us know how we did, how we can improve, and then also most importantly, if there's any questions that either we didn't get to or you thought of after the webinar closed, let us know. We'll definitely reach out to you afterwards. So with that, today's speakers. So today I'm joined by Antoine Jabara, who is co-founder and GM of MSP products here at JumpCloud, and Derek Belair, who is co-founder and CEO of Augmentt. So I know we're all super excited to have them on board, and they're very excited to meet you guys as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Antoine so we can begin today's session.
Thank you, Dakota. Derek, I'm super happy to be doing this with you and having the conversation around Shadow IT, because I know that I'm also going to learn during our next hour or so. With that, let's just start. Let's talk about Shadow IT. What is Shadow IT?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, guys, thank you so much for having me. I love having these discussions, and yeah, very excited. Yeah, Shadow IT. I mean, from our perspective, it's something that's been around for a long time. I think, the official definition is any type of IT hardware, software, any type of gear that is being used within the work settings that is outside the purview of IT. So anything that that gets brought in or gets used by an employee, whether it's malicious or not, but that is in the blind spot of IT. That's the way we would look at it. I think that's the way we've seen it, all the way through the years. I don't know if you guys agree or not, but.
And why? So why are we talking about it? Why is it a problem?
Yeah, I mean, Shadow IT's been, again, it's been around for a long time, and whether it was somebody bringing in a portable hard drive or some USB device, I think IT's always found it, very frustrating when employees and contractors bring in their own hardware, software, whatever it is. It's always a risk of potential threats. It's a potential risk of an area where it's a blind side, and IT's always felt that by having control over the network and the devices, they had a much better chance of controlling where the data was and how secure the organization was. Lately, it's really shifted, and it's kind of gone into overdrive, where in the past, you had to sneak in or bring in an actual piece of hardware or install a piece of software on your machine, and all the alarm bells would go off for IT. But now it's so much more pervasive. It's anybody going online, signing up for any applications, whether you need a credit card or not, and starting to use these applications and sharing data in ways that IT just no longer controls. So I would say it's always been around, but these past 4 or 5 years, it's actually exploded, and the amount of Shadow IT that's there, specifically with the work from home, because again, these employees, they and team members, they just want to get their job done. They want to be productive. They don't feel anything is malicious. They're just like, I'm being a good employee. I'm finding new ways, new tools to get it done, but they don't often see the risk associated with it.
Yeah, I mean, so there's clearly a risk of data breach, right? If you're using unsanctioned software that might not be secure enough. There's also risk of data loss, right? Because if you're using a piece of software that IT doesn't know about, then there's no procedure to back up the information. There's no handover procedure. So you might leave the company and all of the data that you've stored on it gets compromised. There's also compromising customer information, right? So you could be using something to store information that has sensitive information in it, which could put your company in situations that it doesn't want to be in, and that might lead to a loss of compliance, right? Unknowingly to the IT team, which is the most frustrating thing, because we know how hard everyone works to become compliant, remain compliant, renew, retest their compliance year over year, and then you have a user who's using something that's really jeopardizing this. It can be very frustrating, and it's a liability for the business, right?
Well, Antoine, I couldn't have said it better. I think historically, when you brought in a hard drive or you brought in a USB device from home, the minute you plug that into the network or into your machine, you felt that there was something wrong. You were kind of circumventing the process, and again, it was very a clear line. You knew you were doing something, that was potentially outside of the policies. When you look at it now, a marketing person that decides, I'm not a big fan of GoToMeeting. I like Zoom, so I'm just going to sign up for a free account of Zoom, and I'm going to sign up to SurveyMonkey, and I'm going to load a list from Salesforce into SurveyMonkey so I can send an email. A lot of times, the problem with shadow IT these days is that it doesn't seem harmful. As an employee, you don't feel like you're doing something wrong. You're like, I'm trying to do something right. I'm trying to get my job done. People should be thanking me. And meanwhile, it's the data that is the key. The data is what leaves, and nobody knows where it went. Nobody knows who's got access to this application, whether or not you're using the same user ID and password from your corporate network on this weird application. That gets breached. Nobody knows anything about it. That person's leave. Nobody takes the data back. So it's the combination of the barriers to using shadow IT has gone way down, and the risk has gone way up. So it's like the perfect storm.
Yeah, and I mean, it's, as you mentioned, it's very often not malicious, or like it's done unknowingly from users. Like I have an experience to share, which happened to us last week or the week before, actually. We're launching a new product, and we needed to build icons for different operating systems, Mac, Windows, Linux, etc. So we were crunched on time, had to get it out quickly. So I was talking to our UX lead on the project, and I told them, listen, maybe you could do it faster if you use one of these applications that you feed it one thing and it outputs all of the different stuff. So next thing I know, they find an application called Make App Icon or something like that, download it, use it, and within 10 minutes, they get a Slack message from the IT team saying, what's that thing that you installed? Like, we don't know about this. You didn't talk to us about it. And we really felt like we did something wrong, and like we wasted everyone's time. So in that case, like the effect wouldn't have been catastrophic, right? But it could be. So if you download a version of this app that's malicious, hosted by someone that's not doing, that's not well-intentioned, or if you're in another type of situation where you're downloading things that might have a bigger impact on the machine, then you really put your company at risk without knowing it. You're trying to be productive, and you're doing the exact opposite because you're productive, but your company is getting heavily affected. So you're saying that, what you're saying is that it was always a problem, right? But users used to know that it was a problem. You put a USB drive, you feel like you're doing something wrong, that you were told at some point not to do this. Today, you can do so many things, and it's so easy to download stuff, sign up to stuff, put your identity out there, that it's become much more difficult. So it's safe to say that shadow IT has always been a problem, but it's become a huge problem in the last couple of years, right?
Yeah, I 100% agree. Every MSP we talk to or end user we talk to, they all say the same thing. If they can understand where the data is, if they can understand the application and the device, they have a great chance of being able to remain secure and keep a very high level of security posture. It's whenever there is unrestricted use and unrestricted data sharing outside of the corporate applications. There are so few mechanisms for being able to understand where is a user going, especially when you consider this, with the pandemic and the transition to a hybrid work environment, people bringing in laptops, from outside, they bring in their own personal laptops. The problem is compounded. When you plugged in something USB on a laptop, an alarm bell would go off because you're on the network, and it was very clear that something was happening. Now, if you decide that you're going to sign up to some application online and decide that you're going to do even simple work, you're putting the entire organization at risk, because if you don't have, for example, you choose to sign up to an application but you don't have MFA, you're using the same credentials that you use to log into your corporate network. Now you're logging into some weird application. Unless you know where the data is, who's using the application, what are the security standards of that application, you truly have no idea. And I always like to look at it as I always see these breaches for all these popular applications, and you kind of sit back thinking, oh my God, thank God we're not using that. And then you think, geez, I wonder if we are. I wonder if anybody's using it. So it's being able to just bring it all together and not ignoring it, but really embracing it and saying, listen, my users are going to use stuff online. I better understand and embrace rather than ignoring and pretending.
And for MSPs, the problem seems compounded, right? Because you're dealing with the product internally as an MSP, your company, your users are using things, but you're also in charge of, a lot of the times, in charge of trying to mitigate the problem for your customers. So gaining
absolutely.
that.
Yeah. I mean, the MSPs themselves are huge consumers of SaaS. You think of any technician, you know, they love downloading products, they love testing, they're constantly evaluating. And then, you know, they're making shifts, you know, as a corporation, we're moving from Teams to Slack, or we're moving from SharePoint to Jira or whatever. So you're balancing transitioning from one piece of software to another, evaluating lots of others, and then bringing on your customers and your clients. So it's such a big issue. And the beautiful thing is, when it comes to SaaS, there are so many applications. We have a catalog of about 22,000 right now, and we add thousands and thousands every quarter because there are just so many applications that just come up, and people don't know what they do. They don't understand the impact. And, you know, is this an e-commerce? Is this CRM? You know, there's so many.
Yeah. So what are the stages of trying to mitigate shadow IT or address it? Like, could you completely eradicate it?
Well, I think the goal, you know, is not always to try to eradicate it. I think it's to try to gain an unparalleled amount of visibility. So for us, the steps are, first of all, you need to do a discovery to truly understand what are you using. Most of the time when we engage with an MSP or a customer, we say, you know, how many applications do you think you're using? And the CFO or somebody will say, well, we pay for 40 applications, so maybe 40 or 50. And when you do the discovery, you realize that it's actually hundreds of applications. So the first is the discovery and understanding who is using which application. Then it's a lot of classification and understanding the risk of those applications, because again, a lot of times people don't know what these applications are. They see it and they're like, I've never even heard of this. What is it? It could be a photo editing, or it could be a survey emailing software. So it's the discovery, it's the classification, then it's putting together a plan on how are we going to either embrace these applications or potentially restrict these applications. And then it's a lot of training the users as to why they need to change their behavior. Why are we no longer using Slack and we're moving to Teams, and how it's so critical that we stop using it. And then it's the ongoing monitoring. And I would say it's a big loop, and then you monitor to make sure that whatever education you did, whatever policy you implemented, that it is actually being adhered to by the company. And then you continue to discover, you continue to classify. It never ends, but you just gotta get on and try to understand and really embrace it.
So I read somewhere that a larger company had around 30 or 40 SaaS applications that they were using, and they asked the IT team to guess how many unsanctioned applications were being used, and the guess was like around double that amount, like between 50 and 80. They did an analysis and discovered that there were over 700 applications in the wild being used within the organization. It's difficult to get a good sense of what's happening, and you're always going to be surprised, because it doesn't mean that they're using the stuff, but it could mean that they set it up, they created an identity there, moved some critical data, and access it from time to time. That's enough. But when you go to the user, ask them, are you using this actively, Dropbox? They'll say, no, I just use it from time to time to share stuff. I didn't think that I should tell you that, because I'd rather do this via or over sending emails, because an email has a limit of whatever megabytes in it. And then you're like, yeah, what are we going to do? So discovery, classification, planning, and then mitigation or like implementation of the plan. So it feels like this initial discovery classification work is the most time-consuming exercise, right? And then it becomes a maintenance effort that takes less and less effort. But before we talk about this initial discovery, how much time do you expect MSPs should spend, like any way, like to give us an estimate? I don't know if it can be in minutes or a function of users, devices, companies managed. Like, how much time do an MSP needs to spend per month or per quarter just cleaning up, making sure that everything's okay, and that like mitigating any new discoveries?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, there's a lot of factor in the size of the organization, for example, and how distributed it is. I would say that, you know, if you use a product like ours for discovery, it is fairly quickly. You know, an agent gets deployed through a product like JumpCloud, it automatically starts to gather information. It starts behind the scene. It starts to create a map of the usage by user, by frequency. And so all of a sudden, it's like, you know, uncovering a bit of an iceberg where you're like, okay, I thought we were using just this tip. Turns out there's a lot of applications below the waterline. And the way we tell people is, you know, the easiest way to start is start with the biggest used application by the most amount of people, work your way down. And the key is to try to not make this a front load heavy exercise, because people won't do it. So make it so that you deploy the agent, the data starts to come back. You start to understand what is truly the picture. You usually start, we tell partners to start with those applications that are potentially the highest risk, the file sharing, CRM, anything that is to do with storing and processing of sensitive data. Start with that. And then the key is you just have to start. So as an MSP or as a customer, it's really about saying, okay, you know, we're going to start with our file sharing application. Turns out we're using 6. We should only be using 1. That's what we're going to focus on today, this week, this month, this quarter, whatever the capacity that you have. So the discovery is very quick. The work that takes a lot of time is the evaluation and trying to understand a plan and come up with training and come up with procedures around what should be used. Creating that system of record of these are our approved applications, that's really the outcome of the discovery, right? Is for you to say, now that I understand that we're using 300, what should be the application we use? 50? Great. Now, of the 300 that are not, you know, beyond the 50, which are the ones I need to start addressing that are the most concerned? Chances are Adobe Acrobat may not be, you know, your number one offender, but an unsanctioned use of MailChimp or Dropbox, that could be where you start. So it's different for everybody.
Yeah, so this is like discovery. You put an agent, in the case of Augmentt, it maps out the environment, surfaces all of the different services being used by employees, and then you're able to get a sense of how dangerous these services are, and you can start classifying them. You have a whitelist of tools that your organization officially endorses, and then you have the discoveries that you have to do some work on. The work involves asking yourself questions along the lines of, is this safe to use? Is there a better alternative that fits our IT goals better that the company could use in that case? If I were to tear it away overnight, how much would it affect the employees of the company? Would I need to give them an alternative? Do I need to help them with migration? So it's a lot of questions, and it's not easy. And you're mentioning creating a system, right? So this system, is there a way the MSPs can find a template of a system that they could use to like take applications through a vetting process?
Yeah, so the way we do it in Discover is we allow the MSP, once they do the discovery, we usually say, do you have a list, or does your customer have a list of their approved applications? In our application, you can approve or ban or create inquiries around specific applications. So the easiest thing to do is say, tell us who, you know, let's understand what are the core approved application. Let's turn those into approved. Let's figure out the list of applications that should be banned. Let's ban those in our application. And then the rest, the gray area, is what you really investigate. The applications that you would deem as banned, those are very straightforward. You would get a notification every time somebody tries to access those applications, and you can really sort of restrict that. But what we try to do is try to give each customer and every MSP as much detailed information and classification and risk levels for these applications, so that you can just apply, you know, a standard list of applications into our product. So our product, even though we classify everything, we let the end user and the customers work together to say, this is our baseline. Some MSPs will create a baseline for themselves that they will apply to every customer, and some others will work one-on-one with the customers to figure out what is their specific baseline of information.
Got it. Got it. So, and then when you have a plan in place, and then you have these like gray area types of solutions that you have to evaluate one by one. What do you see as happening, like most commonly? Are they being replaced quickly? Are your MSPs that are using your platform keeping them for a very long time and not touching them? Are they turning them into green quite often and are saying these are fine to use? Like, what are the trends that you're seeing?
Well, the first step typically is whenever a discover happens and the MSP runs a discovery on the customer site, while there's, they see the entire list, what usually really captures the imagination of the customers is those applications where they feel threatened right away. They're like, oh my God, why are we still, like, who's still on QuickBooks? We already made the change to this other application. Like, who is still using that? I want to know exactly. Like, why is David from the office still using that? So really what typically happens is those applications that should no longer be in use, that's usually gets the #1 focus. And usually it's a conversation between the IT, the MSP, the IT person, and the actual end customer, the employee, to say, why are you still using it? Is it functionality that's legacy that you still require that this new application doesn't have? Like, explain to me why we're still using this and how often are we using this? So there's a lot of back and forth, because what we found is that a lot of time, even though customers and MSPs are shocked to see the data and they don't understand it, there's often a very logical reason as to why that application is in use. For example, if you standardize on OneDrive and all of a sudden you start seeing Dropbox, instantly you're infuriated that somebody is still using it, and your mind goes to some malicious activity, but only to find out that it's 2 people in your legal office that require it because they're lawyers. That's the only mechanism they have. So it's not often about all or nothing. It's about restricting it and making it an application that is okay to use by certain people, but not by others. And what you find is that when you do the overall discovery, it's very rare that it's blanket sweeping, block this, block that. It's a lot more about, all right, let me understand. All right, there's a good explanation. Let's either make me as an IT person, make me the administrator of this application that you're using so I get the visibility, give me access to the back end, let me understand what you're using. And ultimately what the MSP and the customers do is they work on a sort of an application list that says these are whitelisted, they're fully approved, these are really banned, and that is a 0 policy, and everything else has a bit of an asterisk that says Antoine and Derek are allowed to use it, but nobody else. And then you set up the rules and notification to be notified if anybody else tries to access it. So it is often the impulse to want to block it, to want to stop it, but most of the time it's really just about embracing and trying to understand. And it's always been like that in Shadow IT. Even if somebody brought in a removable hard drive, it was a lot of time because they had problems transferring file and they needed it to work offline from home. And eventually you just agreed to it, but understanding it and creating policies around it, that's the #1 goal. It's not to say don't use online applications.
Yeah, 100%. And like I can talk about from my experience working at JumpCloud as an employee, the way that it's done, the way that our IT team, awesome IT team, by the way, does this is I install an application on my computer, let's say a chat app, WhatsApp or something like that. JumpCloud detects that an application was installed and alerts the IT person. They Slack me and say, what's that you installed? If they have it in their system and it's blacklisted, they do it, I think, by hands. Like we have sheets that say these are allowed, these are not allowed. So it's not as sophisticated as Augmentt Discover in this case. They say, okay, this is not in our list. So what do you use it for? They try to understand. So they have discovery questions that they send me on Slack. And then they say, okay, give us a couple of minutes. I don't know what they do. There's something that they do. They talk to each other. They have a process in the background. And then there are 3 outcomes. It's either, okay, you can keep using this. And I suspect that they add it to the whitelist so that if someone else downloads it, then that's fine. Great, that's a long-term solution to that specific application. Or they tell me we have to remove it. Do you need to transition data away from it before we do that? And in that case, I answer and we figure it out. Or the third option is, and it's happened to someone in the company, is that this is banned, this might be malicious, their privacy policy is invasive and it's going to affect our compliance if we keep it. And they issue a command on the device to remove the application. So when I was thinking about our conversation today and trying to put Shadow IT in context, and especially for our MSPs, I thought about one thing, which was that if there's no, it's going to be a maintenance effort, right? It's a constant effort. You have to live with it. It's a tax. Okay. So if it's a tax, depending on how you charge your customers as an MSP, is it something that you charge them for maintaining that?
Yeah, so we offer the discovery piece as part of our solution. Some MSPs charge for it, some don't. What we tell the MSP is run a discovery on your customer's environment to at least understand how big or how small of a shadow IT and a SaaS usage problem that customer has. You could be pleasantly surprised that, oh my God, they don't use any. It's never the case. Everybody always uses lots. But you'll at least understand what you're dealing with. When you take a look at that data and you compare it to the type of business that customer is in, whether it's highly regulated, whether it's bound by HIPAA or PCI, or you'll understand how big of an issue this is. What we tell the MSP is run the discovery, understand the problem, sit down with a customer. The plan, everything after that is to charge, right? It's let's create a plan together on how, as a project, we're going to document, we're going to establish white, black list, gray list. We're going to create a process, as you said, Antoine, for how are we going to deal when new applications come up? Because strictly blocking new application is never the solution. So it's always about trying to understand, building policies, creating training plans, and then monitoring. All of those things are monetizable by the MSP, and they're a great conversation to have, because again, and we do have some sample policies that you can put in place and procedures, because as you said, if you discover that all of a sudden Derek decides to use an unauthorized app, blocking outright is not going to work. So there needs to be a conversation of what you're using. Number two is the IT person needs to be made an administrator of that application right away. You need to understand the scope of the data that is being potentially stored. What is the business case? Is it a short-term business case? Is it a long-term business case? Should more people be potentially added to it? And ultimately, IT wants to be an enabler. They don't want to be there telling people do this, don't do that. They want to keep everything secure, make sure they have the visibility, but have the employees be productive, be successful. So it is truly a partnership, but there's a great monetization strategy for the MSP once they know what is being used, how big of a shadow IT problem there is. It's always a great conversation to start because it's very eye-opening for the customer. It's a very positive conversation for the MSP to have with the customer, and it leads to a gold mine of potential service revenue down the road.
That makes a lot of sense. And in terms of trying to restrict shadow IT or put people in a tunnel, that would limit their ability to do this. I know that JumpCloud helps with this because a lot of our partners use us, for example, for single sign-on, password management, generated devices insights, also creating conditional access policies on the devices. And I've heard it a million times, I don't want users to be able to access this specific application from their own device. This is why they could use a conditional access policy to help mitigate against this. I don't want users to create their own accounts here and there. So what I do is I set up single sign-on, which is more secure. They don't need to think about managing passwords and stuff like that. But it also lets them know that if they're using something that's not single sign-on enabled, they're probably doing something wrong and they should talk about it. And this is where password management comes in. So we offer password management capabilities to fill the gaps. So users fill in the passwords there. Any credentials metadata stored in there shows up in the reports for the admins. So they're able to see, oh, okay, so we have users that are now using credentials on these types of accounts. That doesn't make a lot of sense. So I think that what you do with Augmentt Discover is essential, and it's always going to be a need, right? Regardless of the systems that you have in place, regardless of the solutions that you have deployed to try to limit shadow IT, there's always going to be a need to have proactive discovery of in the wild services being used and classification. There's no way around it, right? It's not a short-term problem. It's a long-term problem that is here to stay.
Yeah, I mean, the way it was described to me by one of our partners, it was the best. It was like a sandwich. Augmentt is kind of the bread. You guys are like the meat in the middle. We do the discovery. You guys are the tool to be able to really implement best practices, to create an environment that is much more secure. And then we basically come in and just monitor that is actually things are not getting worse. There's not more shadow IT being discovered. So it's very complementary because, again, as an MSP, it's great to discover what's being used, but implementing a policy, having, you know, the ability to turn on MFA, to have the password management, like all of those things is what's going to make you more secure. And then you can basically go back and see, well, have things gotten better? Are we still seeing problems? And so it is absolutely complementary from that perspective.
100%. And by the way, for those of you who don't know, the Augmentt Discover agent can be deployed through JumpCloud. So it feels like a unified experience. You could set up the JumpCloud agent on the platform, then deploy Augmentt Discover, and then Augmentt Discover does its thing of mapping the entire ecosystem, classifying the different types of application, helping you create a plan to mitigate shadow IT cases. And then you use the mechanisms, the levers that JumpCloud provides you to restrict access to applications, cloud services, and devices. So yeah, it's a nice story to tell. I'm glad we're doing this, by the way, because I feel like it's that we don't talk enough about, right? Shadow IT is kind of it's a second-rate citizen. Like everyone's talking about security, identity management, implementing multi-factor authentication, etc. But like shadow IT is one of the main reasons why data breaches occur today.
Well, you're absolutely right. And it's funny because I feel like shadow IT got a bit of a bad rap back in the day. You know, everybody was like, oh, somebody's sneaking in a USB drive in their shoe and some crazy, and it got this sort of stigma of like, come on, is there really a shadow IT? Like, is anybody sneaking in devices to try to connect to the network? But it's almost like now it has truly exploded where it is absolutely unrestricted. You know, it's never been easier to sign up and start using an application. I'm always amazed at how many applications directly, you know, you log into the app, it's like, oh, would you like to connect to your Salesforce? Just put in your Salesforce username and password. There'll be an API connection, data will start flowing, and you're like, how have you not had to involve anybody in IT to do this? Like, this is crazy. And so you're absolutely right. The shadow IT thing has gone from a you know, very much sort of a spy, you know, sneaking in hardware to something that is just so prevalent. Every single person is trying to do this, you know, and get applications working together. And what's scary, and this is what we talked about before, is that people do not feel they're doing anything malicious. And that's the scariest part. When people know they're doing something wrong, it's easier to adjust. But when people feel that they're not doing anything wrong, because we talk to them, we're like, why did you download that? They're like, oh, well, because my contractor only works with Box and not Dropbox, so what's the harm? And you're like, oh my God. And that's the hardest part, is that they don't see the problem, they don't see the issue until something happens. And the breaches are absolutely right, because so many people, we found so many times they use the same user ID and password from their core application on the network to log in everything else. You guys actually stop that, which is fantastic. And tools like yours will help adjust that. But if you don't have tools like JumpCloud, you know, anybody can use the same user ID and password, no MFA to log in everywhere. And these applications get breached and you think you're harmless. And then next thing you know, everything's in the cloud.
Yeah, 100%. That makes a lot of sense. With that, I think that, so should we open the floor up to questions? See if there are anyone who have any questions that we could probably answer, have a conversation around, etc.
Yeah, Antoine, we do have some questions. So, but before that, I know we have a nice offer and Augmentt has a nice offer. So, Derek, do you want to talk about the offer you have for all the attendees on today's session? And I'll post a link in the chat for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically what we're doing is we're offering 100 free licenses of our product to anybody there. These licenses they're not like, we'll give you NFRs, but these are licenses to be used at a customer location. And the idea is that you can deploy the agent through JumpCloud. You can start doing the discovery. All of it's for free. There's no time limit. There's no restriction in functionality. It's the full product, the full Discover product. And you can move those licenses around. So you can decide that you want to stop using them on one customer, then move them to another customer. So if you're just looking at doing auditing and you want to try 100 seats on this customer and then move them to 100 seats on this customer, move them, you can do that all day long. Our biggest goal is get you doing shadow IT audits to all of your customers, understanding the problem, and then working with JumpCloud to remediate and make things better. So if you want to take us up on it, yeah, access the link. We'll be more than happy. And again, this isn't like you'll get 10 calls from a sales guy. This is, you know, an onboarding of like, let's get you up and running and get you using those licenses.
Cool. And from my end, I know that we're providing our MSPs on this call with free account that they could sign up to. There's NFR licenses in there, and they can deploy JumpCloud to their customers, and with the help of our team to get the product out there. So I think that we have a link somewhere that attendees could click on. Oh, okay, that's good.
So everyone has them, and then we'll also include both those links in. We'll send a follow-up email after this with the recording in case you want to share it out. But the links will be in there as well. If anyone missed them in the chat, they'll be there for follow-up as well.
Nice.
Awesome.
Awesome. I know, Antoine, we have a pretty good question. We talked a lot about data breaches. You know how Shadow IT can cause data breaches. So someone's asking, are MSPs at risk of being on the hook if some of these data breaches occur in their client environments?
I mean, I can answer from my perspective. You know, what we find is that most of the time these applications are not being, provided by the MSP. They're applications that are being used by the customer, by their employees, and therefore they are at risk, not you. Regardless if you do an audit, regardless if you help them with policies and training and implementing better tools, at the end of the day, it's their employees and it's their usage. And unless you are providing the application and you are taking responsibility for that application and that data, it is really up to them, and they are the ones that bear the responsibility.
Nice.
Yeah, we have another one. So does using a fixed wireless network for internet access change the playing field when dealing with Shadow IT?
Well, so depending on the tools that you use on the network, a lot of our customers and the MSPs customers will deploy DNS solutions to try to really understand the web usage, the web traffic. It's great. It's definitely a source of data. Anybody that's looked at DNS log file or firewall log files will probably be cross-eyed by now and trying to just ingest that much data. A lot of times it becomes a bit meaningless. To be honest, Augmentt created Discover because a lot of the partners we were talking to when we were asking them about trying to understand Shadow IT, they said, well, we're looking at log files, we're looking at firewall logs, but my God, there's a lot of stuff. And the problem is 99% of what the employees do online is not using applications. It's surfing the web, it's going to LinkedIn. So it's very hard to understand out of all of the web traffic over multiple days, multiple weeks, multiple months, how much of that are actually applications and what are these applications? So it's everything else. So I would say right now there's a lot less dependence on the network as a source of accessing the internet. You take your laptop from home. If you don't have the DNS agent, now you're basically completely blind. And DNS is not designed to give you visibility into what is the meaning of this URL. It is really meant to, help you create a safe surfing environment when you go online, but not necessarily to tell you, hey, by the way, that is actually an application. That's an HR application. That is actually hosted in Pakistan. That does not have an ISO certification. So therefore, that should probably ring an alarm bell.
And the concept of a network is slowly eroding, right? Like people expect to be able to work from anywhere at any time on any device. And so looking at one medium doesn't give you the full picture all the time.
100%, 100%.
All right, we do have some specific questions we'll probably follow up with people on, but Antoine, since you mentioned the password manager, someone asked if the password manager ties into JumpCloud. They just saw it on our site, so we'd like a little more info if you have a couple seconds on that.
Yeah, the password manager is something that we're launching. It's currently in early access. We're launching it in October. It's deeply integrated within the JumpCloud platform, as is everything else. So you launch it and manage it from within the JumpCloud admin console. It has agents on iOS, Android, apps on iOS, Android, Mac, Windows, Linux. It's also in all major browsers. And it has the same capabilities that other password managers have. I would say the advantage lies in the architecture. It's a decentralized password manager that we can talk more about on the site. So if you're interested about it, email me. My email is atwan.jabara@jumpcloud.com, so my full name. And it's also our deep integration with the JumpCloud platform. So it complements single sign-on. You deploy single sign-on when there are gaps because single sign-on is paywalled or doesn't exist for a specific service. Password management complements it nicely.
Absolutely. Looks like the questions slowed down. There are some specific ones that we'll definitely follow up offline. Derek, there is one that says, what does it say? That someone's really impressed with your support. So kudos to you and the Augmentt team on that. So if there's any other questions, we didn't get to, definitely fill them out in the survey. We have a survey at the end that, feel free to reach out. I believe everyone's email was provided at the beginning, but if not, reach out to us and we'll be sure to answer that. So with that, just want to say thank you again to Antoine and Derek. I learned a ton. Hopefully everyone else did too. It was a great conversation. Definitely a starting point for everyone here, and hopefully everyone walked away with some good next steps with trying Augmentt out, trying JumpCloud out, and really building up their tech stack to combat the shadow IT problem that, as we hear, is definitely a problem, whether you think it is or not. So with that, I just want to say thank you again. Thank you everyone for attending, and here's the next one. So thank you.
Thanks, guys. Really appreciate it. Thanks, Antoine. Thanks, guys.